You don't really understand an antagonist until you understand why he's the protagonist in his own version of the world. John Rogers.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses.
In all aspects of storytelling, in life, everywhere you go, there are always going to be at least two sides to the story. Especially in your writing, if you have a protagonist and an antagonist, they are going to see the conflict from two very different sides. And that's what we're going to talk about. Our number today is 2, so we're focusing on the two sides of every story.
One of the biggest advantages to having multiple sides of a story is not only the conflict, but you get to highlight the differences between them and make both sides interesting. This is through juxtaposition. What juxtaposition means is you're putting something adjacent to something very opposite to highlight how very opposite they are. So if you put me next to my ex-husband, we're both Ravenclaw, Slytherin, we're right around that area. We're very similar, and the nuances between us are harder to find. You put me next to someone like Lee, who is the Gryffindor, and just a fantastic, wonderful, loving human being, our differences get highlighted, and I seem even meaner because she's so sweet.
That juxtaposition can really bring out different characteristics in your characters, in the story that you're telling. Having those two different sides really makes each character more potent in the end. Because without that extra highlight, without Lee there to make me seem like that bright, happy, loves everyone kind of person, I would not seem that bright, happy, loves everyone kind of person.
In your writing, this is especially powerful because you are able to show a couple of different ways of seeing the exact same thing. I might see something as a cozy cottage in the woods, even though Lee might see it as creepy, decrepit cabin in the middle of the forest.
And probably haunted.
Looks cozy enough to me.
I'm not saying I wouldn't go there, but I would be looking at it in a completely different light. One of the most common ways that you will see this juxtaposition in your story is between the hero and the villain. We've talked about it before, that mirrored reflection of the hero and the villain and the many things in their lives that run parallel with each other, but it's how they handle it that makes them so different and on opposite sides of a problem.
Harry Potter and Voldemort are a textbook example of this, where they had very similar upbringings, but they made different choices. And it's those choices that makes one a good guy and one a bad guy. As a storyteller, the most common way that you will use this particular two sides of the story is simply using two different points of view.
Using those two different points of view will help you tell a complete story that doesn't suffer from one character's ignorance. You will always have one character that doesn't see everything they need to, but you can use another character's point of view to give that necessary information to the reader. Now, this does work more in some genres over others, which we'll talk about in a second.
This is also just a good exercise in writing. You can write the princess character walking into the dungeon, and then you write the dungeon master walking into the same dungeon. How they look at the different torture tools and the dirt on the ground and these kinds of things. This is just a great practice to make sure that you're really into the voice of the character that you're writing their point of view from.
And it can help you learn how to not head hop, because you do need these voices. You need these moments to be distinct between which point of view you're telling it from. Otherwise, it gets jumbled and confusing, and you don't get that strong character voice and those two strong sides to the story. I think the place that I see this happen more commonly is in romance novels, because you will see the main character and their half of the story, all of the emotional conflict that they're going through, and then you can see the love interest perspective and get the insight and look at what they're experiencing while trying to assist the main character navigate all of the problems in their lives. One of the things that people really like about this in romance specifically is you can see these main male characters just falling to bits over their love interest and just adoring them wholly and completely. But the type of genre that this doesn't work well in is something like a mystery, where you want to hold information back from a reader, where you don't want them to see all sides to a story, because that other side is spoiling the ending.
I think if you do end up telling multiple points of view in that type of a story, you're sliding into the suspense thriller category, because then you've got this cat and mouse where we know who the bad guy is. It's not necessarily a whodunit kind of mystery. But there are things to keep in mind when you're telling from multiple points of view. One of the biggest issues I see is when people want to tell the same scene again. The reader already has the information of what went down in this scene, but now we need to see it from the other character's point of view. This is very difficult to do well.
More often, you will need to pick one or the other in these scenes. Always take the point of view that is going to be more interesting. If we can already guess what's in her head, we don't need to see that. What we need to see is his perspective, because it's going to be more interesting. He doesn't have the information, and we get to see a little bit more of that tension. We get to see his thoughts and processes as he goes through whatever it is that scene is.
For instance, you could have the scene before being her gripping the bathroom sink, looking herself in the eye in the mirror, going, okay, you can tell him this lie. And just have her rehearsing this lie over and over and over again in the mirror where she's trying to convince herself. Then we hop to his point of view. He doesn't know she's lying, but we do. And that makes that scene a lot more interesting than her point of view as she's trying to lie to him, because we already know her mindset going into the scene.
But then we get to see his internal conflict and reaction. Now, the other option for choosing a point of view is to choose the sequential one, the second point of view. This is common for rumors, for relaying information. If you have like a conversation between girl A and B that's, I have to tell you something, you can then cut from there and show girl B running to tell girl C about everything. And we know C is going to tell D and E, and it's just going to chain from there. But we don't need to see A to B. We really don't even need to see the conversation between B and C. We can just show D telling E, and we can assume that it went all the way through the rumor chain of sharing that information just from A saying, I have to tell you something, and B running to girl C.
If you want a case study on this, the first couple seasons of Downton Abbey are the ones that I really noticed them doing this very well. If you absolutely must tell the same scene from multiple points of view, this is when you really lean on those anchor moments. Those bits of dialogue, or in my case, gunshots, that kind of thing where, okay, now the Capitol building's blown up. We can back up from the next point of view and then see the Capitol building blow up, and we can kind of get that they're happening simultaneously.
Now, you don't want to do this if the two people you're telling that scene from are together and working together the entire time. This is something that you can use if they end up splitting up. And that anchor point of splitting up is usually where you want to go back to, because any of the information that you need to convey from one point of view can be shown from the other character's point of view if that's the one that's more interesting in the end. You do want to keep these ones really short so that readers don't have time to forget that anchor moment. You don't want them to have too much time pass in between where suddenly they're confused about what the timeline is and what everything is happening, because they recognize that they've gone back in time, but they don't remember that anchor point to really pin it down and realize, oh, this is same thing, different perspective.
Yeah, if there's too much time in the reader's mind between the anchor moments, it'll feel like a separate moment. Now, you can do this two sides of a story with your plot structure. This is something like bookending a story, where you're starting it kind of in the same place that you're ending it, but you've got this satisfaction because the character has a new perspective on the world, but the same scene is happening at the beginning and the end of it.
When we are talking about this book ending, it doesn't have to be a whole big thing. It doesn't have to be an entire scene. It can just be a very small moment, a line of dialogue, a character movement or choice that they do, but feels very different because of the character's new perspective.
An example of this would be something like Forrest Gump, where he's sitting on the bench and then the feather theme plays as the feather is floating down. And he's waiting for, I think, the bus or whatever. That's how the story starts. And then he starts talking about his life. And then the movie ends with Forrest Gump on a bench waiting for a bus as this feather floats down. That moment is a nice little bookend.
That kind of moment really gives it a very cyclical feeling that can be quite satisfying because you see and it helps you reflect as the reader on all of the changes, all of the growth that the character has experienced. But in the end, especially when you are first writing your first draft, your own satisfaction is more important. The point of view within your story that you should use is whatever you find to be most interesting for that scene. So,
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.